Play different.
Greetings fellow Mac addicts. In this video we're looking at Odyssey, the Legend of Nemesis. That's Nemesis on the title screen here, looking like he's just had a fight with a honey badger. This is a Mac exclusive RPG that started as a Bungie product before Richard Rouse III and his company Paranoid Productions took it over and made it very much his own creation, but we'll talk more about that later. Rouse is definitely one of the most interesting people in mainstream game development right now. He's most known for the Suffering series, and is currently working on a new game about infiltrating a cult. I'll link to more information below because I think it looks quite promising. But for now, let's check out Odyssey, the Legend of Nemesis. First, a fun little fact. The cover for this game was painted by Derek Riggs, most known for his art on Iron Maiden albums. Now, onto the game. So here is the plot. Your land has been plagued by drought and infertile soil, leading to famine. You set off to find a magical staff that could save your land. You find it and begin to sail back home. But a freak storm sinks the ship and you find yourself on the shores of a strange, unknown land, with your magical staff nowhere to be found. And this is where your adventure begins. There isn't much of an overarching story. Basically, you make your way through a series of islands, each one with their own situation, story, and characters. There are threads that connect them all together, but the big picture doesn't really form until right at the end. Despite this, and despite plenty of combat, Odyssey is definitely a story-driven game, and much of the game is spent exploring and talking to people. Basically, you have to try to understand each island's situation, and then try to figure out ways to tackle it. Many of the situations explore topics not commonly seen in games. Here are some examples. There is an island where religious leaders became desperate when people were losing faith during dark times. So they created a false show of the immense power of faith, but they begin to use it to oppress the people, and eventually even believe themselves to be gods. There is another island with 3 identical towns named Billsville. In them, every single person is named Bill, and the society is built around suppressing individuality. This is because they believe it leads to the happiness and well-being of all citizens. This is actually one of the more funny islands. I'm trying to show off some of the things I found amusing here, but despite the comedy, there is a very sinister undertone to it all. Another island is basically post-apocalyptic, with only 3 humans left alive, but one of them refuses to let capitalism die, despite the rest of the world being essentially dead. I'll talk about the first island in detail, since it's not too spoilery. So, on the first island, there are 2 feuding cities, one called Nyack and one called Elba, which is actually Cain and Abel backwards. Nyack is aggressive and has strong military might, and is very proud of its history. Elba, on the other hand, is quite a bit nicer and has advanced medicine and good food. So basically, it's like the USA versus Canada. Ha 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 ha. Just so we're clear, that was a joke, since Nyack also has an appreciation for the arts. Ha 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 ha. Again, that is a joke. I visited America several times and have always enjoyed it. Anyway, the solution to this problem is to bring the 2 cities together with a cultural exchange. It's made clear that this is not an instant solution, which really impressed me. After all, you can't magically solve years of animosity, but you can take a step in the right direction and start the healing process. I feel it's important to note that you don't have to quote-unquote solve every island, though you do tend to get rewarded with good items if you do quests. You don't always have to pick a positive solution though. In fact, sometimes there is no best solution, as there is a lot of grey in this game. At one point, I had to actually walk away from the computer to think about what to do, because there was simply no way to have a 100% positive outcome to the situation I was facing. The game also lets you commit atrocities, though sometimes by accident. This is because Rouse really wanted players to think before they acted, but I'll talk more about that in the spoilers section. Odyssey uses a heavily modified Minotaur Engine, Minotaur being an earlier game from Bungie Software. Of course, everybody knows about Bungie Software now because of the Halo and Destiny series. Odyssey uses this engine because it actually started as a Bungie product. Alexander Seropian, the founder of Bungie Software, started working on it, but then he became too busy with the business side of Bungie. This was also after they had shipped Pathways into Darkness, and the company decided to shift their focus to first-person games, so Odyssey wasn't a very good fit for them at the time anyway. Rouse knew Jason Jones, also of Bungie Software, and Alex Seropian because they all attended the University of Chicago. Rouse offered to take over the project, and they made a deal where he could get it published with someone else, in this case, Microsoft. When Rouse took over the project, a lot of the core mechanics were already in place because they were inherited from Minotaur. For the conversation system, they used the same code they used in Pathways into Darkness, which is why it may feel very familiar. There wasn't much story yet, and Rouse ended up completely rewriting it, and built the entire game world too, making it very much Rouse's game. Compared to similar games from the same era, Odyssey has very streamlined RPG mechanics. There are no character classes, for example, and only 3 statistics for the player to improve. Rouse says that some of this was inherited from Minotaur, but he didn't change it because he liked it. He liked that you were just an adventurer and could use any ability you wanted, be it a powerful weapon or a powerful spell. At the time, Rouse was also much more interested in the narrative parts of game design rather than conventional leveling. Especially with Odyssey, he was much more interested in the story and the choices the player could make, so he went much further with that. There is even one island where combat is entirely optional. There is only one real fight, and avoiding the enemy is quite easy. It plays more like a point-and-click adventure game, and it works quite well. One of the most memorable things about Odyssey to me was the focus on non-violence to solve problems, although there were also violent options you could take if you so desired. I asked Rouse why he went in this direction. I thought perhaps he was tired of so many games only offering violent solutions. He told me he didn't think of it as having an agenda, nor was he sick of violent games. But on the other hand, he said, it just makes the game more interesting if you have to think before acting. After all, you don't use a hammer to solve every problem. There are certainly parts of the game where you have to think before acting, and where your actions have consequences. But I'll talk more about that after a spoiler warning. Hidden on each island is a Vex Chamber that Nemesis has set up for you. These are basically all little puzzle sections. These range from block pushing puzzles to solving a riddle, and there's even an interesting recreation of rock, paper, scissors. But my favourite is the first one, which just asks you a series of questions to find out what kind of person you are, even if your choices don't seem to actually matter in this section. Nemesis created these because he wanted to test your wisdom and not just your might, and see what kind of person he is dealing with. If you manage to solve a Vex Chamber, you're rewarded with upgraded stats. Like many old school RPGs, Odyssey has a keyword conversation system. All characters respond to name and job, but it's up to you to find out what else they can talk about. I do enjoy these conversation systems, but it has the same flaws as other ones of this type. Occasionally it can be frustrating trying to find the right word, but they only happen to me a handful of times. It can also take you out of the game when you ask about something that they should logically be able to respond to, but don't. Still, the characters are very well written, even if they could use some more dialogue here and there. I also applaud the game for its diversity. There are plenty of women and people of colour among the NPCs in the game. On one of the islands you meet the characters Bert, Rand and Russell, named after the great British philosopher. The way they talked about each other suggested to me that they were in a relationship, making them a gay couple. This was very rare back then, and even now it's still not seen very often. I asked Rouse if I was correct with my assumption, and he told me I would not be wrong if I interpreted them that way. He went on to say that every game he's worked on has had characters who could easily be seen as gay, but has also never made them definitively gay because it was never relevant to the larger plot. He also felt it can be clunky if done wrong, or feel too heavy-handed. Additionally, he likes people being able to interpret the characters however they think best with the information they're presented with. Politics feature heavily in many of Rouse's games, but he says he doesn't think he's actually doing political commentary. The games feature real-world situations, sometimes with dark, complex subject matter. It just so happens that sometimes that crosses over into the world of politics. He says that he never really tries to make some sort of statement with his games. He just likes to explore ideas that he finds interesting and hopes other people find it interesting as well. That said, it's impossible to make a game about politics without some of your own beliefs sneaking in there, and you can definitely feel Rouse's ones in many of his games. Odyssey feels like a very well-read game. There are many references to classical literature and philosophy, and many situations encountered feel inspired by real-world politics and history. The game feels intelligent, and more importantly, it respects your intelligence, something so few games do. There is a real joy to exploring in Odyssey. There is plenty to discover on each island. Little micro stories and treasures and even people. For example, on the very first island you find a hermit who wants to pass on his martial arts to you before he dies. He created this martial arts because he took a vow against weapons. Elsewhere you find a man who lives as a hermit to forget the evils of man and not to reshape land to suit him. That was one of my favourite parts of meeting new people in the game, to find out their stories. It's also one of my favourite things about meeting new people in real life. An element of Odyssey that really sucked me into the world was the day and night system. It went far beyond just becoming darker when night fell. NPCs had their own schedules which they followed through the day. They would get up in the morning, go about their daily business, and then go back to bed at night. At the time, Rouse actually thought it wasn't a very important feature to have, but Alex Seropian insisted that it be implemented. Nowadays, Rouse thinks it's a very important thing to have to create something that feels like a living, breathing world, so he's glad that Alex made him do it. Of course, it wasn't an original idea. The Ultima series had already been doing it for quite a few years. Rouse did a fantastic job of integrating it with the game, however. There are some fantastic touches, such as townspeople gathering around a bard as he plays every morning. It's also sometimes easier to sneak into an area at night time because most people will be sleeping. In all honesty, I spent quite a lot of time just following people around. I just like to see what they got up to during the day, if they had some kind of secret life they were hiding from people, or if they would help me discover something that I would otherwise have missed. So yes, my class type is Stalker. Also, you could do this. One of the weakest parts of the game is the dungeon crawling. Most of them are quite bland and simply not very interesting to explore. They really show the Minotaur origins of the game. Now, they weren't painful to play through, but they're simply not very compelling, especially when compared to the overworld. Luckily, dungeons tend to be quite short, but they still bring down the game a little. One of the bigger problems with the game is how the leveling system works. To level up a skill, you keep using that skill. For example, if I wanted to level up my sword skill, I would keep hitting things with swords. And once that skill is leveled up, your character will also increase their level and will get higher stats. The problem with this is that the requirement for each new level increases each time. So to try to put it in a simple way, it would require say 100 experience to reach the first sword level, 300 experience to reach the second sword level, and 800 experience to reach the third sword level, and so on. And if I didn't use melee that whole time, the requirement for the next melee level would still be 100. This means that if I only use swords through the whole game, by the end I would be very under-leveled. But if I used a whole range of skills, I would end up much stronger. This really gets in the way of the player choosing how they want to play the game. There are two ways to help deal with this, however. First of all, if you find a powerful weapon that uses a skill that you have a low level in, start using that baby right away and get that level up. Secondly, it's the skill that kills an enemy that gets the experience. So if I have a high sword level, I can weaken an enemy with that and then switch to melee to finish it off to get the experience points for the melee. Additionally, considering how narrative driven this game is, I really wish the player was awarded experience for finishing quests, rather than just for killing off enemies and solving Vex Chambers. I also feel the game spreads itself a little bit thin story-wise. The game explores many interesting ideas and themes, but since each island explores different ones, it never really goes into any of them in real detail. The game definitely did make me think about the subjects presented, but I can't help but feel the narrative would have been stronger if it was more focused. There is a plot reason for this structure though, but I have to talk about it in the spoiler section. But despite these problems, I still highly recommend Odyssey: The Legend of Nemesis. It's aged quite well and is still very playable today, and explores subjects that, depressingly, most modern games still wouldn't dare look at. Best of all, it's now freeware, and if you get stuck, there's a fantastic walkthrough written by Pamela Sears, which helped me finish this game again after 20 years. I'll link to that below. And that, my friends, is Odyssey: The Legend of Nemesis.
Warning: the rest of this video contains spoilers.
Earlier I mentioned that you should think before you act and that there are consequences to your actions in this game. An example of this is on a second island, which is run by evil priests. One solution to this problem is to poison all the priests. But if you do this, the head priest, who is very powerful, will slaughter all the innocent workers. So this isn't exactly an ideal solution, but there is another way you can deal with this situation. There is a gigantic flame that the priests have come to worship and is the source of their faith. If you destroy this flame, the priests will instead commit suicide and all the workers will be free. I am now about to spoil the ending of the game, so you have been warned. When you finally meet Nemesis, he reveals that each island is an experiment to see how much people can endure. And why is he tormenting these people? He says it's because he wants to find the root of all evil and find a cure for it. There are 4 things you can do which lead to 4 different endings. You can just get on a boat and sail back home and forget this all happened. You can fight Nemesis and destroy him. You can side with and join Nemesis. Or you can reclaim the staff, which is the source of his power. Which is the best ending? Well, personally I think it's taking the staff, although it does require a hefty sacrifice from the player, which you will soon see.